We are on Chav Zayin Amud Beis on the bottom. We're going to stop a little bit early today, only because it's a short DAF tomorrow, and I don't want Rabbi Kropkin to have nothing to do tomorrow morning. So we'll go to the top of Chav Ches Amud Beis, either to the Mishnah or right after the Mishnah. So the Gemara on DAF Chav Zayin Amud Beis on the bottom says, "V'lo shel nashim la'olam imnei hakavod," that you can't put the body of a woman in the street because of kavod. Even during the Levaya, the custom was that during the funeral they would keep the body out. You know, we have it in the front of the funeral home. They would keep the body out in the street. So you shouldn't put the body of a woman, even if you're going to put the body of a man out in the street, obviously wrapped up in the tachrichin, etc. But you shouldn't do that for a woman because of kavod. What's the kavod? Amr Nardai, lo shanu elachaya. This is talking about a woman who died machmas vlad. She died in childbirth, and therefore, if you leave her in the street, so there might be blood that's coming and get on the tachrich, and it'll be very embarrassing for her, and then it might be embarrassing for other women as well when people see the blood on the tachrichin. So you shouldn't leave that woman in the street, but a regular woman, stamazah, you can leave her in the street. Aval she'ar nashim manichin, just like you would put a man and you would eulogize him while he's in the street, you can eulogize a woman while she's in the street. Rabbi Lazar Amar filu shar nashim. No, even shar nashim you can't. Why? Even if it's not connected to the blood. Why? Dichsiv, because it says Vatama Sham Miriam Vatikava Sham, because we see a precedent based on the pasuk that Miriam died and she was buried, and you see that she died and she was buried right away, right there. Samach Lamisa Kvura. They didn't leave her in the Rachov, they didn't leave her in the street even for a short period of time. V'Amar Rav Elazar, and Rav Elazar says Af Miriam Beneshika Mesa. Gemara Basra tells us that 6 people died straight from HaKadosh Baruch Hu without the Malach HaMaves. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. So the Gemara Babasa go through the sources of how we know that, how they died from the Neshika. It doesn't say anything about Miriam over there. It tells us Miriam, it doesn't tell us how. So how do we know that Miriam died by Neshika, not with the Malach HaMaves? Asya Sham Shami Moshe. Because why? By Moshe it says, Vayama Sham Moshe al Pi Hashem. That Moshe died al Pi Hashem, with the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and over here it says Vatikar Sham Miriam. So just like Vayama Sham Moshe, Vatikaver Sham Miriam, the Sham and the Sham show us that Miriam also died with the Neshika. Mimei Malo Nemar Ba'al Pi Hashem. If that's true, then why doesn't it say al Pi Hashem by Miriam? Says the Gemara, It's not tznius. It's not tznius to say that Miriam died with a kiss from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's just pashnisht. So therefore we don't say it, but from the word Sham and Sham, we learn that Miriam died with a kiss, with Malach HaMaves. Amar Rav Ami, Lama Nismcha Mitas Miriam Parshas Paraduma. Why does the parsha of Miriam come right after the parsha of Paras Aduma? Lama Lachama Paraduma Mechaperes Av Mitas and Shal Tzadikim Mechaperes. To tell you that just like the Paraduma is Mechaperes, what's the Paraduma Mechaperes for? So for the Cheta Egel, other Rishonim say it means Mechaperes, not necessarily that it atones, but that it purifies. It purifies for Tumas Meis, somebody that is Tameh from a dead body. But the Pashup Shot is that it's Mechaperes for the Cheta Egel, the sin of the golden calf. So just like that is Mechaperes, it's next to the Parsha Miriam dying, because Af Mitasan Shel Tzadikim Mechaperes. When a righteous person in the generation dies, it's mechaper, it atones for the sins of the generation. What does that mean? It either atones for the sins of the generation, or it encourages other people to do tshuva. Amar Belazar, Lam Nitzcha Mitas Aaron LeBigdei Kahuna. So it's very interesting. When the Torah tells us that Aaron died, it also tells that it tells us all about the Big Day Kahuna right before he dies. It tells us about the Big Day Kahuna. Why? Similarly, just like the mita of a tzaddik is mechaper, and just like the paraduma is mechaper, so too the Big Day Kahuna are mechaper. And each one of the garments that the Kohen Gadol wore had the ability to atone for certain sins. A choshen mishpat, for instance, that was worn on the chest, that was mechaper for crookedness in judgment. The mi'il, the bells, were mechaper for lashon hara. The tzitz was mechaper for gaiver, for haughtiness. So we see that these things are mechaper, and that's why they're next to each other. Tana Rabbanan. So now, this is a little bit of a scary conversation, but the Gemara is going to talk about kares, the punishment of kares. And there's 4 different types, at least 4 different ways of categorizing kares. First of all, it's how you die, in terms of how sudden you die. As we'll see, if you die suddenly, it's unclear from the Gemara if this means that you're definitely getting kares, or it's just a possibility. One would probably say that it's a possibility that you're getting kares. I don't think we're going to say that every single person who dies between 50 and 60 is chayiv kares, even though you can learn the Gemara like that. But seemingly what the Gemara is going to be saying, as we'll see based on the ages, is that if it happens, if you fit into these categories, then it's a possibility that you died of kares. So we'll see that it's going to depend on how sudden you die. It's going to depend on what age you die. It's going to depend on whether children die in your lifetime. And the fourth one, which we can't really attest to, is it's going to depend on whether you have certain yisurim, whether you have certain afflictions after you die, which we're not necessarily going to be able to attest to. So let's see the different rules of how, again, I would say somebody possibly died b'karis. Again, I don't think we're going to say that every single person who passed away between 50 and 60, as we'll see, necessarily died from karis. Tana Rabbana, meis pitom, if you die suddenly, zohi misa dechufa. That's a misa that's called snatched. Chala yom echad v'meis zohi misa dechufa. If you are sick for one day and you die, that's a misa dechufa. And again, these are various, according to the Gemara, these seems to be various possibilities that you died from kares. Rabbi Chanani ben Gamil Omer Zohi Misa Magefa. They're arguing it's not such a nafkamina, not such a practical difference, but he's saying if you're sick for one day and then you die, it's not a Misa Dechufa, it's not a push Misa, but it's a Misa of a Magefa. How do you know? That Shanemar ben Adam Hineni Lokech Michad Machmad Einecha b'Magefa. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Yecheskel that I'm going to take your wife. Your wife's going to die, and what happens? The next day, the next day he comes and he says, my wife died. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a day warning. She was sick for a day. And you see that the pasuk calls that he's going to take her away with magefa. So you see that when somebody's sick for a day, and then they die, it's called a magefa. If they're sick for 2 days and then they die, that's a quick misa. Gimel, if they're sick for 3 days and they die, that's ga'ara, that's a rebuke misa. Arba'a nizifa, 4 days and they die, that's a scorned death. And again, these are all types of kares, seemingly. Chamisha zohi mitas koladam. If you're sick for 5 days or more and then you die, then we're out of the parsha of kares. Then it's quote unquote not possible that it was from kares. That means that it's just a regular death. Rabbi Chanin, Ma'ikra, how do you know that once you're sick for 5 days and then you die, you have a 5-day warning, then it's not in the category of kares? Hein karvi amechlamas, because Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, your days of dying have come close. Hein chad, hein means one. Karvu, which is plural, trey, 2. Yamecha, trey, your days are 2. That's 2 and 2 and 1 is 5. Ha-chamisha, he warned him 5 days before dying. Hein chad, how do we know one? Hein is 1. Because in Yavani they call achas hain. Hain means one. It's interesting. The Shla points out that hain is an originally Hebrew word. We're not going to use the Gemara to tell us what it means in Yavanis. What it means is that hain was originally a Hebrew word. They forgot what it meant, and then they went back to Yavanis, which had adapted the Hebrew word, and they learned from Yavanis. But we weren't going to learn from Yavanis just because hain means achad in Yavanis. It happens to mean achad in Hebrew. Again, they forgot what it meant, so they went back to Yavanis, and then they remembered what it meant in Hebrew.
It says somewhere that ta'in is no comparison to nothing.
Interesting. Okay.
You think about it.
Right. Thank you. Okay. So that is the how quickly you die, whether you're in the parsha of kares or not, 5 days or more. Meis b'chamishim shana, if you die at 50, zohi mitas kares. So that's mitas kares. Again, the Gemara here seems to imply that 50 is kares no matter what. Again, one can explain, hopefully, that not everybody who dies at 50 is dying from kares, but the Gemara seems to be saying zohi mitas kares at 50. That's kares. Chamishim ushtayim, and we'll see the Gemara means 50. It means 50 to 59.9 until your 60th birthday. Chamishim ushtayim shana zohi mitaso shel Shmuel haramasi. At 52 is the misa of Shmuel, and therefore that's not kares. So 50 to 59.9 is kares. However, if you die at 52, then it's not kares because it's the death of Shmuel haramasi. Shishim zohi misa b'dei shamayim. At 60, it's misa b'dei shamayim. Now, misa b'dei shamayim usually implies what kind of death? Also a punishment. So a lot of Rishonim learn the Girsa that really it says Shishim is Misa kol b'nei adam. Just like 5 days and more is regular, many learn that it means 60 is regular. Okay. Amar my zitra, how do we know that 60 is regular? Maikra, dichsiv tavo bekelach elai kaver. You'll come with kelach to me at the kever, with old age. What's bekelach? Well, bekelach is gematria shitin, havu, it's 60. 2, 20, 30, and 8. 60, right? Countant? Yes. 60. 30, 20, 2 and 8 is 60. So we see 60. Shivim seva, if you died 70, that's old age. Shmonim gevuros, if you died 80, that's strong. Dichsiv yemesh noseinu behem shivim shana, ve'im bigvuros shmonim shana. So now we're going to say Rabba, which I said outside before, but Amar Rabba, he clarifies when we said chamishim means me chamishim ve'at shishim shana zohi mitas kares. From 50 to 60 is kares. V'haydelo chashiv lehu. So why on top does it not say 50 to 60? It just says 50. Mishum kvodo shel Shmuel haramasi. Because if it said 50 to 60, then you'd say Shmuel haramasi died from kares. We're saying no. 50 to 60 is not kares. 50 to 60 is kares, I'm sorry, but 52 is not kares. Fine.
At the specific age of 52.
Right.
Right.
Rav Yosef kihava bar shitin, and that's why Rav Yosef, when he turned 60, avlu yom tov l'Rabban, he made a party. Because that's it. He's not going to die. If he dies now, it's not from kares. Amar mar nafki limi kares. He said, "Welcome to my party, Baruch Hashem. I am not dying of kares." Amar le Abaye, whoa, you missed something. He denafik le mar mikares tishani mikares diomi minafik mar. What are you talking about? We just learned that you can die suddenly, and that's also kares. So very nice, you made it to 60, but now if you die without any warning, or you die within 4 days or within 5 days of getting sick, that's also possibly kares. I'm making a party because I'll take half. I got away from half of kares. That means the only thing that could happen to me now is dying suddenly. But in terms of dying before 60, that I'm already past, and I'm going to make a party. A half party. Rav Huna nach nafshe pitam. Rav Huna died suddenly. Havu kadai Rabbana. Rabbana got all nervous. Rav Huna the Great, he died suddenly. What does that mean? That means he died of kares, or at least he seemingly might have died of kares. Tanel hu zuga de midayahiv. So Baruch Hashem, the pair of tzaddikim of the place called midayahiv, say no. They clarify. Lo shanu ela shelo higia legvuros. When they say that if you die suddenly, that's kares, that's only before 80. Aval higia legvuros, like Rav Huna was, zohi misas neshika. Then it's a bracha to die suddenly after 80. So let's just chazir for a second. 50 to 59.9, not including 52, is kares. 60 to 79.9 is kares only if it's what? If it's pitom, if it's sudden. 80 and up, then you make a real party. Then, even if it's pitom, it's not kares. If anything, if pitom, it's better. Once you're over 80, it's better to be pitom. Then it's mamash bracha to die suddenly.
Chaim, when he turned 80, he told his kids to make him a party.
Right, so that's what it's based on this Gemara.
Remember, the reason he made a party, he says he was afraid that if he would die before people, his whole speech was, if you don't say Lashon Hara, you'll live a long life. So when I reached 80, it's time for a party.
Chaim. Now, it's just not clear for the Gemara what happens if you die before 50. So before 50 is not clear in the Gemara. One can argue that before 50 is not related to kares at all, even pitom, because all this whole conversation was 50 and up, and pitom. One can argue suddenly before 50 maybe kares. One can argue under 50 even suddenly is not kares. It's not clear from the Gemara what happens under 50. Again, I just want to clarify that even though the Gemara implies that it's kares, I think one can definitely learn that it's not certainly kares. It's just that between 50 and 59.9 you have to be choshesh, you have to worry that maybe it was kares. Amar Rava. Rava says, Chaye b'niyu mizone lo b'schus atalya milsa ela b'mazlo atalya milsa. Rava says something very scary. How long you live, how many children you have, and how much food you have is not based on your zechus. It's not based on your merit. It's rather based on mazel. It's based on the celestial beings. It's based on under which stars you were born and whose influence you're under. Now, the Gemara in Shabbos, Tosfos says that even though we are under mazel, and we'll see some of the Tanaim and Amoraim felt starker than others in terms of how much we're under the mazel, but even though we're under mazel, Tosfos seems to say that our zchusim, that things that we do, good deeds and chesed and mitzvos and tefillah, can actually change the mazel. Even though we'll see in the story in 1 second that it's not necessarily true. We'll see that also you have to remember it's not just mazel. That's why it's complicated. You can't just say, oh, I have bad mazel, because it also depends on your deeds and whether you do good deeds and whether you daven or not. You can't just blame everything happening on mazel. It might be that the mazel sort of plays a role in it, but it's not necessarily that mazel plays everything. But the Gemara and Tosfos clearly implies that you can change your mazel with tefillah and good deeds, etc. How do we see that mazel plays a part? Because Rav and Rav Chisda were two great rabbis. Tarvayu Rabbanan Sadiki Havu. They were both Sadikim Mar Matzi V'Asimitru. Both of them daven and rain came. So it's pretty great if you could daven and rain comes. Rav Chisda Chaya Tishin V'Tartin Shnin. Yet Rav Chisda lived to 92. Rabba Chaya Arban. Rabba only passed away at 40. Bei Rav Chisda Shitin Hilule. The house of Rav Chisda had 60 weddings. Bei Rabba Shitin Tichli. He had 60 avelis. Bei Rav Chisda Tzmida L'Kal Bei V'Lo Midbai. They had so much food that their kelev even got good food, and when they gave the kelev fine flour, it didn't even eat it because it was already satiated. And the opposite, Bei Rabba Nahama Desari Le'Inshe V'Lo Mishtaka. They didn't have fine flour. They had barley flour, and even the barley flour which they had, which was cheap, there wasn't even enough for the people to eat. Forget about the dogs. Ve'Amar Rava. Rava says, Hani Tlas Mili Bayi Kame So we see from that story that Mazel plays a big role, because you can't argue that Rav Chisda wasn't great. Rabbi and Rav Chisda were both great, and you see that Rabbi clearly did not have as good Mazel as Rav Chisda. Rava says, Hani tlas mili boy kamishmai. I asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu over three things. Tarti yovli chada lo yovli. God gave me two of them, and He didn't give me one. Chuchma se de Rafuna. I asked for the chuchma of Rafuna, for the wisdom of Rafuna. V'aftare de Rav Chisda, and the wealth of Rav Chisda v'yovli. And He gave it to me. Again, we just said Rav Chisda was very wealthy. An v'sanuse de Rabba bar Rafuna lo yovli. But He didn't give me the humility. Humility He didn't give me. Rav Seorim achua de Rava. Rav Seorim, the brother of Rava, Hava Yosef kamei de Rava. He was sitting next to Rava when Rava was on his deathbed. Chazia dehayava ka minamneim. He was on his deathbed. Amar le lema le mar delol tzaran. So very interesting. Rava turns to his brother and says, "Do me a favor. Can you tell the Malach Hamaves when he's killing me now to spare me from the pain?" Amar le mar lav shushvineho. What do you mean, Rava? You're a great man. You're friends with the Malach Hamaves. Amar le kevan de imser mazal lo ishkach bi. No. My mazel's already gone. I can't speak to him anymore, because now that I'm on my deathbed, I lost my mazel. There are those who learn, I believe Rashi learns that everybody has a malach next to him, whether you believe in malachim or not. We have a malach called the malach mazel, and when you're on your deathbed, you sort of lose that malach. That's the malach mazel, not the malach mavis, the malach mazal. So we see over here that Rava says he doesn't have the mazel anymore, so he can't. Even though usually, which is scary, usually you see that the Tanaim and Amram, they're able to schmooze with the malach mavis. I come back, as we'll see in a second. But over here, he said, I'm past that. I'm ready on my deathbed. I can't tell the malach mavis not to harm me. So he says, do me a favor to his brother. Can you please pray and tell the Malach Hamavis not to harm me? So he says to him, Amalei lishchazi limar. Says, I'll pray for you, but do me a favor. When you go up, so come back to me in a dream and tell me how it went. I want to know if I prayed well. So he came back to him. Amalei havale lamar tzara. Did you have tzar? Amalei ki rivda de kusilta. Nope, I didn't have much tzar. I had a little bit of a pinch, just like the pinch that you feel at the time of bloodletting. It wasn't so bad. You did a good job davening. Rava Hava Yosef Kamed Rav Nachman. Rava, obviously, before this previous story, before Rava died, was sitting in front of Rav Nachman. Chazi de Kamanamnim. He saw Rav Nachman was dying. Amalei lema lemar de lo tzaran. So Rav Nachman said, do me a favor, Rava, can you daven for me so that the Malach Hamavis doesn't take me in a painful way? Amalei mar lavadam chashu. What do you mean? You're a well-connected man. You got connection with the Malach Hamavis. Amalei man chashim man safin man riki. He says, no. Nobody's got connections at this point with the Malach Hamavis. Who's considered important? Who can invoke fear? Who is refined? You can go talk to Malach Hamavis, but once you're on your deathbed, that's it. Even if you had a relationship with him beforehand, he doesn't want to hear from you anymore. It's time. Amalei l'schazi limar. I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll daven for you, but as long as you come back and let me know how it went. Daven from him, and he came back to him. Amarlei havalei lamar tzara. How was it? Amarlei kim mishchal ben nisa mechabel. You may have heard this before. It wasn't so bad. It was like taking milk out of a cup of milk. It was pretty good. However, hair. What'd I say? Milk. Okay, milk out of a cup of milk is also good, but hair out of a cup of milk is even better. It's like taking hair out of a cup of milk. V'amar li HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he said, however, even though it wasn't painful, if God said to me, Zil b'ahu hama, you could go back to this world, which is very fascinating because we know you can only do Torah mitzvahs in this world. So it sounds like if he would come to me and say, go back to this world, kadhavis lo ba'ina dinafish be'ituse. Even though it wasn't painful, it was very scary. So I wouldn't do it again. It wasn't fun. Yes, relatively, if the Malach Hamavis needed to take me, he took me in a good way, but it was not fun. It's interesting, again, I didn't see this, but it seems to be a diuk that one can maybe say that, he's saying, even if I would have the chance to do Torah mitzvahs. I don't know if that's what he's saying. I think he's just saying, I wouldn't go through it again. Like, don't get the wrong idea. But seemingly, if he would send him back to this world, so maybe he would say, since you can only do Torah mitzvahs in this world, maybe Einachanami, he would have said, I would come back. But in terms of the pain, it wasn't so painful, he says, but at the end of the day, he says, I wouldn't want to do it again. Rabbi Elazar Havakachal Chuma. Now we're going to see stories where they actually speak to the Malach Hamavis, as you see. Rabbi Elazar was eating truma, and the Malach Hamavis came. Ischazilei. The Malach Hamavis came to visit him. And he said, Amarlei, yo, buddy, you got to go away. Truma ka'achilna v'lav kodesh ikri. I'm eating truma. You can't kill me now, because if you kill me, then the truma that's in my mouth is going to become tamei, and you don't want to make the truma tamei. Chal v'lei shata. So he said, you're right. The Malach Hamavis said, I'll give you a minute, but then the Malach Hamavis realized, once you give him a minute, no. Malach Hamavis only gets a specific time to be able to kill you. Once he pushed it off, so Malach Hamavis no longer had power to kill him at that that time. Rav Sheshes is Chazile B'Shukah. Rav Sheshes met the Malach HaMavis in the marketplace. Amarle B'Shukah Kibe'ema Isa Lagabi Beis. He said, do me a favor. It's not proper to kill me in the. It's not covered to kill me in the shuk. Wait till I get home and kill me. Again, it doesn't say what happened, but seemingly he couldn't. Right, he didn't go home. Either he didn't go home, or we don't even have to say that. Based on the last story, if the Malach HaMavis can only kill you at the specific time, if he gives him reshus, even if he goes home, he doesn't necessarily have reshus to kill him in the house. It doesn't say what happened to him. Rav Ashi is Chazile B'Shukah. Rav Ashi also went to the shuk. I don't know what shuk this was, but I wouldn't go to the shuk. Rav Ashi went to the shuk. Amarle itrach li tlasin yom. This is Gishmak. He says, do me a favor. Come back in 30 days. V'adurei l'talmude, because I got a chazer shas. I need 30 days. Why? Because it says, the song that was made famous by Yaakov Shwagi, Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmudo b'Yado. Because they're going to ask you kashas and all of Shas after 120 years. He says, give me another 30 days to be able to go ahead and chazer Shas. He gave it to him. B'yom tlas and asa. So on the 30th day he comes and he knocks on his door. He said, who is it? Malach HaMavis. Hold on a second. I'll be back in a minute. Amar lei, my kuleiha. He said, what are you doing? You said you're going to give me 30 days. Why are you coming in the morning? I'm still have one more masechta to finish. Kadach geragle de barnasan vein malchus nagas bechaver tafilu kulei nemai. So Malach HaMavis says, you're right. Vis-a-vis you, I have no problem giving you the time. But also, klape shmaya, it's time for Rav Huna bar Nasan to become the Nasi in Bavel, and there's a rule that the Nasiim can't overlap, and you got to go before he comes. So yeah, I gave you time to go Chazer Shas, but I have a little bit of a problem, because now it's the time for him to become Nasi, and you got to go in order for him to become Nasi. So he says, so seemingly he killed him at the time. Rav Chisda lo hava yachile. Rav Chisda, he couldn't kill him. How long did Rav Chisda live? We said on top. Rav Chisda lived to 92. So he was 92 years old, and the Malach HaMavis couldn't get to him. De lo hava shasik pume migirsa, because he wouldn't stop learning, and he could only kill him if he stops learning. Salig yaseh ba'arza debei Rav. So the Malach HaMavis sat on a big cedar tree. Paka arza v'shasik v'yachilei. He broke the cedar tree. He startled Rav Chisda. He stopped learning for 1 second, and he was able to kill him. Rav Chia lo hava matzi lemikravlei. Rav Chia he couldn't kill. Yom achad idmelei ka'aniya. So what did he do? He dressed up as a poor man. The Malach HaMavis asa tarif ababa, and he knocked on Rav Chia's door. Amalei apikle rifta. Can I please have a piece of bread? Afikule, he gave him a piece of bread. Amalei v'lav kamarachim marani. He said, you're such a nice guy that you give me bread as an ani. Ahu gavra milo kamarachim mar. Why don't you have rachmanis on me as the Malach HaMavis and let me do my job? Regali le'achvi le'shuta denur. It sounds like Rav Chia didn't realize who he was. As soon as he says this, so the Malach HaMavis showed him a rod of fire, and Rav Chia said, oh, rod of fire, that means you're the Malach HaMavis. Please take me, amsi le'nafshe, and he gave him his nefesh. Let's just do the Mishnah, and then we'll stop after the Mishnah so that Rabbi Karapkin has what to do tomorrow. The Mishnah on Chav Ches Amud Beis says as follows, and just the background to the Mishnah is that there were different customs at the funeral. The man usually did the hesped, and the woman would have different types of crying that they would do at the funeral. But again, any crying that we'll see that you couldn't do on the Moed here or on other holidays that you couldn't do here, the men couldn't do as either. But it just uses the women as an example because the women are the ones who would usually go ahead and cry out loud and wail. So the Mishnah says, Nashim b'moed ma'anos. So on the Moed, the Nashim are allowed to be me'anot. We'll see what that means. Avalo mitapchot. Again, since it's the Moed, so we're not going to have excessive mourning. So they're allowed to do me'anot, but they're not allowed to clap. Rabbi Shmuel Amer, hasmuchos amita mitapchot. Rabbi Shmuel argues and says, even on the Moed, the ones that are close to the coffin, they're allowed to clap. Again, clapping is a higher form of mourning. So therefore, the Tanna Kama says on Moed you can't do that. Ma'anot you can do, mitapchot clapping you can't do. Rashi Chadash and Mechaniko bePurim, Rashi Chadash and Mechaniko bePurim, which are on a lower level than Chol HaMoed, then not only can you be Ma'anot, which everyone seems to agree you can even do on Chol HaMoed, but even mitapchot, and seemingly even not near the coffin. Bezeu vazeh lo mikono, but you can never do song. Anytime it's a no Tachanun day, then you cannot do song. You cannot sing, which seems to be the highest level of mourning. Nikbar hames, and if the person is buried, then lo ma'anot v'lo mitapchot, then you can't even be ma'anot. Seemingly, even on Rashi Chadashim, Chanukah, and Purim, and even on the Moed, which was Asur, which was mutter otherwise. But once they're buried, you're not allowed to do it. Ezri, so what does this mean? What does this mean? Shekulan onot ke'achat, that they all wail together. Okay, that's one level. That's the lowest level. Kina, Now we said mitapchot is the second level, clapping. Kina, which is the highest level of mourning, which is always aser. She'achad midaberet v'kolan onot achareha, is when one speaks and then they all wail in response to her. Shneamar v'lamdena binotechem nehi, you teach your daughters mourning. V'isha re'uta kina, and a woman teaches her friend a kina. So you see that a woman and her friend are involved in a kina, that the woman seemingly speaks first, and then the friend responds. Aval le'atid lavo, but in the Zman HaMashiach, hu omer, Yeshaya tells us, Bala, Bila, Hamaves, Lanetzach, this is what we say at the end of funerals, death will be swallowed forever, Umacha Hashem Elokim Dima Me'al Kol Panim, and God will erase Dima, tears, from the face of all. And it's interesting to note that even though we have a Gemara here, so seemingly the reason that the Mishnah is ending with something that's not related, yes, it's related to mourning, but it's not necessarily related to the other parts of Kina and Ma'anot and Mitavchot. Seemingly it's ending the Mishnah on a positive note, because this is the end of the Mishnayos for the Masechta, and they want to end the Mishnayos on a positive note. There's a discussion what the last Masechta in Moed is. Maybe it's Moed Katan. We still have Chagiga to go, but that's another, especially if it's the last Mishnah of the last Masechet of Moed, so then for sure you're going to want to end on a high note. Have a wonderful day.